So blustery conditions, heavy rain too, spreading across the south, staying fairly cloudy for Northern Ireland with outbreaks of rain, but perhaps mostly dry and bright in Scotland, particularly in the west. Some good spells of sunshine here on Friday, whereas in the east, quite a lot of low cloud moving in, keeping temperatures suppressed and overall quite a bit cooler for most of us compared to tomorrow. Good evening, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
As we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Former military bases are to be commandeered to house young men that cross the English Channel in inflatable dinghies. Will this stop the boats? Will it save money? Or was the whole thing a complete fraud? We'll go up to Shropshire, ask why Michael Gove has just approved a giant solar farm and see how local campaigners feel about it. Gordon Chang, expert on China, will tell us what they've been up to around the world in the last few weeks. And joining me on Talking Pints, when he played a lot of football for Tottenham Hotspur, he then became a London black cabbie. Yes, Mickey Hazard joins me on Talking Pints. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you and good evening. The top story on GB News tonight, the Immigration Minister has announced plans to stop housing asylum seekers in hotels and instead place them in disused military bases. Admitting that the use of hotels had harmed some towns, Robert Jenrick said migrants will now be placed at sites in Essex, Lincolnshire and East Sussex. The accommodation will be guarded by 24-hour security and meet migrants' essential living needs.
These hotels take valuable assets
from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people.
Now, Scotland's new First Minister had vows there could not be more unity in the SNP as he unveiled his first cabinet today. Humza Yousaf says Scotland's government should look like the people it represents and that he's proud to have a record number of women agreeing to serve. The 37-year-old says the appointments reflect his commitment to a radical and progressive agenda for the country. It's emerged the Prime Minister's wife has links to a company that's set to benefit from a new childcare policy announced in the Chancellor's budget. Childminders will now be paid £600 to join the profession, but that sum doubles if they sign up through an agency. Ascarta Murthy is a shareholder in one of 6 agencies listed on the government website. Labour says Rishi Sunak must urgently set out what steps he took to avoid an actual or perceived conflict of interest. Now, Julian Knight claims he's the victim of a witch hunt after the Conservative Party refused to reinstate the whip over further complaints made about him. Earlier on, the MP for Solihull demanded the whip be reinstated after he was cleared by police of a serious sexual assault allegation. Mr Knight, who was suspended from the party over the claim, had always denied the allegation, describing it as false and malicious. And the German president has hailed a new chapter in relations between his country and the UK as today he welcomed King Charles and the Queen Consort to a state banquet in Berlin this evening. And there's a warning that there are some flashing images coming up if you're watching on television. The royal couple have been greeted on the red carpet leading to the Bellevue Palace. Before the banquet, it's Charles and Camilla's first foreign visit as heads of the royal family, but the King's 29th trip to Germany. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Farage.
In a moment, we will go to RAF Scampton to be joined by our reporter Will Hollis. We'll find out how the local community feels about the fact it's been announced that that will be a site housing 1,500 young men crossing the English Channel. We'll also go to Catterick in North Yorkshire, which really was the surprise card of the day. It's in the Prime Minister's constituency, and people are going to be sent there. We're not quite sure yet who they are, but Anna Riley, our reporter, will join us. We'll get some reaction from up there. But first, some of my thoughts on what's happened today. This is a government that is all about spin. It is purely a PR machine. And gosh, they must have been so pleased in Downing Street with themselves this morning as the Sun runs its huge front page picture of a ship, oh ship, small boat arrivals, to live on barges and to cut the £3.5 billion hotel bill. There you are. Hook, line and sinker, the Tory press have swallowed the idea that something really big's going to happen. Well, let's have a look at a little clip of the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, in the House of Commons just before 1 o'clock today.
The government will use military sites being disposed of in Essex and Lincolnshire and a separate site in East Sussex. These will be scaled up over the coming months and will collectively provide accommodation to several thousand asylum seekers through repurposed barrack blocks and porter cabins. In addition, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is showing leadership on this issue by bringing forward proposals to provide accommodation at Catterick Garrison Barracks in his constituency.
So there you are. Virtually no mention of ships or barges whatsoever, only that they are considering the idea, but that doesn't matter. They've got their front pages. That's all it's really all about. And yes, RAF Scampton, well, we broadcast live last week where many of you signed the petition at change.org to say this simply must not happen. No, RAF Scampton, home of 617 Squadron, the home of the famous Dam Busters raid, a place not just of huge British and international historic importance, but somewhere that had a really viable business plan for the future. Well, that is going to be turned into a migrant centre, along with a former RAF base in Essex, with another training base down in East Sussex near Bexhill, and Catterick. The Prime Minister's constituency has been thrown into the equation, I think, to say to other MPs, you've got nothing to moan about, although we don't yet know what Catterick will be used for, if indeed it ever is. Is that perhaps just more spin? So will any of this work? Well, let's have a look at East Sussex, shall we? That houses 1,200 people. On the 22nd of August last year, 1,295 people crossed the English Channel and were processed through Dover. I suppose the good thing is they won't have too far to travel, but that will deal with one day. In fact, if you add up the 3 declared sites, well, the last half of August last year, 5,500 people came. That's even more than the sites announced today. Not a single person will leave the over 450 hotels they're housed in already. Not a penny will come off the £3.5 billion bill. And indeed, there was talk today in the Commons about local authorities being given even more money. No, all these plans are for those they expect to cross the English Channel over the course of the next week. Nothing in this statement stops the boats. Nothing in this statement reduces the bill. I believe the whole thing to be a complete and utter fraud. Tell me what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, let's go straight away to RAF Scampton, where we're joined by Will Hollis. Will, we suspected last week that the government were going to do this. Tell us what the reaction has been in the village of Scampton today.
Hiya, Nigel. Yeah, you can get a feeling that people are really proud of their history, living so close to RAF Scampton, which, as you've said, is the home of the Dam Busters and is probably one of the most iconic things that ever happened in the Second World War, certainly for the RAF. And people are really quite concerned as to how this connection to the RAF is going to be affected in the local village and the local town. They are really quite worried about what this is going to mean for the base itself, but also for the area that they live in. We've heard from a press briefing that I've had that it's going to be around 200 migrants at first that are going to be moving into RAF Scampton, and then followed by, at a later date, around 2,000. So 2,000 or so asylum seekers that are going to be housed here in total, and ultimately they're going to be placed into the barracks, but also into some modular housing. And I actually had the pleasure of joining a few people that were down at the Dam Busters Inn who were hearing that news that Robert Jenrick is announcing in the House of Commons today, that this army base is going to be one of the places that the Home Office is going to use to try to get asylum seekers out of these hotels.
Absolutely disgusted. It does not make sense to anybody. Everybody involved is going to lose out, even the asylum seekers.
There's nothing to do on the site. There's nothing to do in the village apart from the pub. There is no shop in the village. There is nothing for them here to do at all.
There's indignation and annoyance about that. At the same time, I do feel a tremendous sympathy for the immigrants. I think that it's a rough deal to be treated like animals and pushed into very cramped accommodation.
I think it's a very poor decision.
Well, I just don't agree with it at all. It's just wrong decision.
You won't be able to feel safe. Anybody going out for a walk with their dog, any woman, would not feel safe. We can't live our normal life. We have got reversed roles. We're in terror.
From the residents of the village of Scampton, I feel very sorry for them indeed. A really important historic cultural site is to be desecrated by a government who care nothing for the history and culture of this country. That is my belief. Now let's go to the surprise card up in Catterick, where I'm joined by GB News reporter Anna Riley. Now, Anna, this really was the surprise. Do we actually know whether anybody at all is going to be sent to Catterick, or whether this was just sort of spin saying, well, the Prime Minister is doing his bit. What do we know?
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, we know very little information, in fact, about how this is actually going to work. It's set apart from the other centres that have been proposed, as this is still operational here. But speaking to local people, many of them had no idea about the plans, and also speaking to North Yorkshire County Council, I asked them for a statement, and they said they couldn't give me one because they had very little information about the proposal, so we don't know how many people will be coming here, if any, and how it will work. What we do know, though, is it's Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister's constituency. And when Robert Jenrick made that announcement today, he said Rishi Sunak was showing leadership by bringing forward proposals to use the barracks in Catterick Garrison in his constituency to address the problem of migrants arriving in the UK in small boats. In fact, Rishi Sunak, the constituency is Richmond, and he lives just 30 minutes away in Northallerton. But as I said, unlike other earmarked sites, this is still an active military facility. It primarily serves as a base for the 4th Mechanised Brigade and supports the Infantry Training Centre. And according to the Army, it has a population of about 13,000, which is more than the neighbouring village of Catterick Garrison. It's got 19 barrack compounds, including several other facilities, and it's huge. There's 20,000 acres here of military training area. But what do the people living nearby think? Well, I spoke to a former sergeant, Andrew Walker, and this is what he had to say.
This announcement today about illegal immigrants coming to Catterick, it'll be a nightmare because a lot of squaddies deal with PTSD and mental health issues due to things happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then bringing the illegal asylum seekers across here. It's just going to make people go a bit loopy, I say, and it's just going to cause problems for the council. It's caused problems all over the country when we moved in, so moving into a major garrison, nah, it won't work at all.
Well, that was Andrew, local resident, ex-Army sergeant, living in Catterick, very concerned about the plans. I'm joined by Associate Political Editor of the Daily Telegraph, Christopher Hope. Chris, this government, you know, earlier on I held up this front page of The Sun. It's amazing. The government says anything on illegal migration. You know, they swallow it hook, line and sinker. They're going to cut the bill. No, they're not going to cut the bill. All of these people will stay in the hotels. These military bases are for those that will arrive over the course of the next few weeks or months. Why is the Tory press so gullible in believing the government when it says, I have the solution?
The press want a new idea, Nigel. That's an idea. Oh, ship is this barge that may house asylum seekers when they come here. That's the idea. Currently, there's 51,000 asylum seekers in hotels, 395 hotels, £6 million a day that's costing. What can you do? You must do something. The idea now is to try and get those people out of hotels into those air bases. Not all are appropriate. You may think that, but what else do you do? What do you do if you're in power?
Here's the point. They like to give the impression they'll be emptied out of the hotels and put into these bases. They won't. They won't. No one's going to leave these hotels. And by the way, I believe the number is over 450 hotels from an FOI that I saw a few weeks ago. All these bases will be used for are those that come next week and the week after. And I pointed out, the East Sussex site, one busy day.
They just can't process them fast enough. That's what's going on here. The problem is there'll be thousands arriving in the next few weeks. We're going into a busy summer season. Yeah. These hotels want to make money. People want to go and stay there, when they go on holiday, stay in these hotels. You can't do it if these people are there. They've got to do something. It's desperate, but it's been really ignored for far too long by the government for many people.
Yeah, I mean, look, new idea. This was even mooted 3 years ago. Interestingly, on the night of the Great Storm in 1987, there was a migrant boat off Harwich that had Africans who'd come here illegally, and it was cast off its moorings, but they were all saved. They were all saved from a watery fate. So we have used these ideas before. Stop the boats. That's the pledge. That is the Sunak pledge, and you know, we see this very carefully constructed PR machine as he goes around the country and gives speeches. Nothing about today was dealing with stopping the boats, was it? It was dealing with the symptoms.
This is the symptoms of those who arrive. And Stop the Boats, by the way, is not a this year target. It's an ambition for some point when this migration bill has been passed into law. We don't even know when it will happen yet. Maybe not by the next election. Stop the Boats is a really final line in the sand. I'm not sure whether he can do it.
But he's staked a heck of a lot on it.
Yeah, well, it matters so much, the red wall seats. It regularly polls in the top 3 things that people care about, and nothing can do more to tackle it and be seen to do it. I saw Robert Jenrick there in your clip saying he was showing leadership by offering up the Catterick garrison. That means I'm suffering too. So he's talking to other MPs like James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary. They're concerned about these bases being given over to asylum seekers, and they think, why is that happening here? But I think the hotel situation is untenable going into the summer season.
Yeah.
We've got to do something. And what would you do if you were in government? I mean, that's the question to put back to you, maybe.
Oh, look, for goodness sake, you know, I was warning about this 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Very simple. You just do what the Australians did. You say nobody. You know, we've given 500,000 people refugee status in this country since 2015. You know, don't tell me we're not generous. We are very...
So you defy human rights law?
So what you say very clearly is that anybody that comes into the UK via violent criminal trafficking gangs will never be given refugee status. That's where you start, and that's a very good beginning. And then, if necessary, you have to use the Royal Marines to take people back to France. If that's what you have to do in the end,
and that's just not possible, is it, under law?
And it was interesting that Jenrick did mention that all the things we're doing are going to be in line with our international treaty obligations. So they're not going to... I mean, this ECHR thing... Could it be in the next manifesto? Is that what they might do?
Well, it was under Theresa May. I can't see it. Many MPs would just go really crazy about it. It's not something they want to see at all. I think what they'll try and do is test what the ECHR can do. Why do you have these unnamed judges deciding that you can't fly people to Rwanda, as happened last year, and who are they? How can you test them and see what happens next? But I can't see them fighting election on, withdrawing from the ECHR. Whenever you go overseas with the Prime Minister, the big thing they talk about is human rights. That's the big thing that the UK is proud of championing worldwide. That's why we can't pull out the ECHR.
Well, Magna Carta was about freedoms and liberties.
That's right.
And not state-given human rights. But that's a separate debate for another day.
Not for now.
Chris Hope, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we'll discuss Michael Gove's latest genius brainwave. Yes, he's going to override local democracy in Shropshire and build a solar farm that is the size of 75 football pitches. We'll discuss that in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, I asked you, was today's presentation by the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, simply a fraud? Your responses, Denise says it came from an MP. Of course it was a fraud. What else would you expect? Frank says, we can't carry on spending millions a week on hotels. Something has to give. Frank, you've swallowed the spin. That's what they want you to think. We will go on spending £6.5 million a day on hotels. Not a single person will leave those hotels. These sites are there for new arrivals. And the argument is it's costing £150 a day to put people in hotels. It'll be cheaper in former RAF bases. Whether it's cheaper or not, the bill for this is going up, not down, because the government accepts that tens of thousands more people will come this year. Another says to me, yes, it was a complete and utter fraud, and also a capitulation to the economic migrant tidal wave. We need better leadership, people who believe in Britain, not the spineless political class we have at present. What I have to say, I rather agree with that. Now, another decision that came out late last night, Michael Gove has just given approval to a new solar farm in Shropshire. It's going to be 75 times the size of a football pitch. It is at the moment a piece of land that is used for sheep grazing. It's a piece of land over which wild deer run. And interestingly, Telford and Wrekin, they're the local council. They were opposed to this site. They went through an expensive planning application process, and the planning application said it wasn't suitable. And yet, central government, in this headlong, mad desire for us to achieve net zero, which we never will, by the way, has overridden it. Interesting, isn't it? Food inflation this week was running at 17.5%. You would have thought we'd want to keep as much of our farmland in productive capacity as we possibly could. But no, that is not what we are going to do. Well, I'm joined by local resident and campaigner Paul Kulinkas. Paul, I know you've been involved with this battle. Were you surprised when Michael Gove took the decision to overrule local democracy?
I was completely shocked because the planning inspector held his 3-day hearing. This was in June last year. And then suddenly we were told he wasn't going to make a decision. It was going to be called in by the Secretary of State. So we're now 9 months down the line. He's suddenly come out and made this decision, which drives a coach and horses through the local planning process.
Apart from the local planning process and apart from the views of your elected local council, what are your objections to this solar farm? Well,
it's within the Wrekin Forest strategic landscape. You've heard of the Wrekin, this lovely big hill that's as you enter Shropshire. It's known internationally, isn't it? You know, all around the Wrekin and running around the Wrekin and everything. So this is part of that strategic forest landscape because it's where the king used to hunt and with his deer and stuff like that many years ago. So it's been protected by this plan with a boundary around it, with no development to take place. It's a green lung. It's a place people walk. They come from the conurbations roundabout into the area. Tourists come. Locals use it. The particular area we're talking about is on the edge, and it's the road that comes down. It is like the boundary. Thou shalt not cross this boundary, and that's exactly what's happened. So it's a very odd thing. It just doesn't make sense. But
there are those,
we'll
Paul, that would
happens.
say to you.
The council's got to do something, and I think what's going to happen now is that the council are considering their legal options. Do they actually do anything about it? Can they actually go to the High Court? Can they ask the Secretary of State to actually review the decision?
I think the truth of it is, and I've seen this with wind farm applications and other things, that you can apply for judicial reviews. There are all sorts of things you can do, but once central government decides to stamp its 12-size boots on it, it's very difficult. But Paul, some would come back to you. Some would come back to you and say, we're facing a climate emergency. You know, how dare you be a NIMBY, because this solar farm will help us to save the world.
Oh, well, I totally agree. Solar farms are part of the renewable energy that we need to have in this country. But it's all about where's the right position for them. You want some there, it's a very, very sunny climate, so it actually can produce electricity as much as it can. And the local council actually has its own solar farm. So they built one some years back, and they're generating money to offset the taxpayers' demands on them. And they passed several planning applications. The problem here is it's within the Sreekin Forest strategic landscape, and thou shalt not pass. Because if they do this, it's going to open it up to housing development. It'll spill in there. Are we going to have solar panels up the side of the Wrekin? Now, if this was a national park and had national park status, like the Peak District, Snowdonia and stuff like that, if we could have had that level of protection, that would have stopped it. Because, you cannot go into a national park and do this kind of thing. But we haven't got that level of protection. So they've worked really hard, the council, to get to the current level of protection. So we thought it'd be OK, because we can put them in other places. We've got a lot of Telford's a new town in this part of Shropshire. Massive industrial factory sites around the area. Stick them on the roofs. There's lots of new houses. There's loads and loads of new house building going all over the place. It's a massive area. Put solar panels on roofs and such. So this isn't about being against solar panels and solar farms. I mean, these are big panels. They're about 3 foot high. The worry is you're going to have a 3 metre palisade fencing all the way around it, because criminals are now going in and nicking these solar panels. And you're going to have this wall of steel all the way around it. It's just awful.
You haven't got to convince me, but I wanted to tease out the arguments. Thank you for joining me. I wish you luck with it, but I suspect it's going to be very, very hard. But I do find your arguments as to where these panels could be put very logical indeed. Thank you. I'm kind of convinced that this government, and the Labour government, if it comes in next year, will do almost anything to despoil our landscapes and seascapes, provided we can head towards this madness called net zero, which we'll never achieve anyway. In a moment, we're going to look at China, what China has been up to diplomatically around the world. We haven't had our eyes open. It's big stuff. American expert on China and author Gordon Chang joins me in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are. We don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Wake up, everybody. Something very significant has been happening in the world and accelerating over the course of the last few weeks. It is the diplomatic activities of China. I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined down the line from New York by author and acknowledged expert on China, Gordon Chang. Gordon, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Over here in the UK, Gordon, we're so busy in the West. We're so busy tearing ourselves apart over issues like trans rights that we haven't noticed what China has been up to. And I've been watching, summits with Saudi Arabia and Iran, visits to Moscow, even a new deal with Honduras. Please tell us, give us a précis, what has China been up to diplomatically in the last couple of months?
Well, thank you, Nigel. The most important thing is that China and Russia have been conspiring. They have been creating this new axis. So really what we have is the world is divided. A lot of people in the West say, oh, I don't want this to happen, and sort of assume it won't because of that. But no, the Chinese and Russians are doing this. Last Wednesday, a week ago, when Xi Jinping left Moscow, when he was saying goodbye to Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping stated, change is coming that has not occurred over the last 100 years. And then he said to Putin, you and I together are going to be driving this change, which is basically saying that China and Russia rule the world. We're seeing this in Ukraine. And this is exceedingly dangerous because, as you say, we in the West are not paying attention.
No, that's right. I mean, is that the same in America? I know that Trump talks about the China issue, but generally, my impression is that on Capitol Hill, it's talked about as much as it is in our parliament. What is wrong with us? Are we sort of in denial about the threat the Chinese Communist Party poses?
Yes, democracies are very good for being in denial, especially my democracy, America. We did not pay attention to Islamic terrorists when they killed 6 people by bombing the North Tower of the World Trade Center in 1993. We Americans only took notice on 9/11 when Osama bin Laden reached out and killed 2,977 Americans on one day. And then we woke up, but then it was too late. Really, what we're seeing right now is the same thing. This is the 1930s all over again. Except for Britain and France being feeble, it's the United States being feeble.
Well, I'm worried about it, and I couldn't believe the sight of China brokering talks between sworn enemies, Iran and Saudi Arabia. What's going on in the Middle East? I mean, this is an area where America has done its utmost to have influence.
Yes, well, during the Trump era, we had the best foreign policy in the Middle East since FDR. We had the Abraham Accords, which President Trump should have won the Nobel Peace Prize for. But Biden came in and he's decided to undo that. He's decided a very pro-Iran focus. And his pro-Iran focus fits in with China because China is the main backer of the regime in Tehran. And also Biden decided to isolate Saudi Arabia because over the Khashoggi murder. And what that did was it left the door wide open for Saudi Arabia to abandon the U.S., to reject all of our policies, and to embrace Beijing.
Gordon, I'm incredibly worried about what's going on. Thank you for giving us a quick update. I hope waking up our listeners, our viewers. And we'll have you back on again, please, before too long. Well, there's someone who actually knows his subject, and he's right, and we should be worried. Now, the website Guido Fawkes, it's a satirical, often very informative, Westminster-based website, and it made the point not long ago that The Guardian had profound links to slavery, and they did their best to deny it, but here we are. Guardian owner apologises for links to slavery, and they're going to spend 10 million quid in various forms of compensation. The moral of the story, of course, is that if you try to be too woke, they will always find a chink in your armour. But more seriously, we cannot go on attempting to apologise and rewrite history. Otherwise, we will end up in endless recrimination. It serves no good purpose and actually, I think, fosters further division. Well, another real what the Farage moment. The European Central Bank, the poor darlings, they've been asked to come back to the office to work half a week. Just half a week. And now they've got record numbers of members of staff with mental health issues and stress because they have to work half a week. And I've got to tell you, it's not too different down at the Financial Conduct Authority, just down the river from where I am, in Canary Wharf. About 2 to 3 days a week is considered as much as anybody can be expected to do. My goodness me, what a hopeless snowflake generation we've got. Elon Musk, this is interesting. Maybe if you're not a computer geek, you might think, well, what's this got to do with me? But, you know, the growth of AI, Chat, GPT, the idea that you just ask a computer to do something, it has a brain of its own, and it does it. Well, Elon Musk is coming out pretty strongly today with many, many others in the tech sector. It's the Future of Life Institute. And what Musk and others are saying is quite simply this. There needs to be a complete halt on the development of AI machines at this stage. If it's not voluntary, government needs to intervene because Musk basically says that these systems could become literally beyond the ability of man to control. They could become monsters in their own right. And he says that poses a very real threat to civilization. We're going to watch this space. In a minute, we'll talk to a Tottenham Hotspur footballer who became a London black cabbie. I don't know anybody that's actually been on that journey, but Mickey Hazard will tell us all about it.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Talking pints, yes, in a very rainy Westminster, but we're safe, secure in the GB News Tavern, and Mickey Hazard joins me. Mickey, welcome to the programme. Now, Sunderland, through and through, young lad, clearly totally obsessed with football.
Oh, in love with football. I mean, it's my first love, still is to my dad. I mean, I think my grandchildren and my children overtook football. But after that, football all the way. From the moment I came out of my mum's stomach.
It was this all you ever wanted to do?
Always. My dad would put a training shoe on my right foot and a football boot on my left foot and say, get out there, 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd be playing football, ball up against the wall, 10 hours a day. I wouldn't even go and watch football. I never went to watch Sunderland play, ever. No, all my friends did, not me. While I was
didn't have time
while I was watching. I couldn't play. So, listen, if you want to be good at anything, if you don't put the time and effort in, you're not going to be good. And I put a lot of time in when I was young.
I've had a lot of people, young people ask me for life advice. I always say all the successful people I know have always worked harder than absolutely everybody else. And apart from the very odd person with extremely rare talent, it's true. Now, you were spotted by a scout, but you were quite a young lad, weren't you?
I was 10. And incredibly, Spurs had set up a one-man scouting network in Sunderland, mainly because the assistant manager at the time of Spurs was born and bred in Sunderland, Wilf Dixon. And his friend called Ken Pedeston, I'm not even sure the club were aware of it, to be honest, but he set up and he came and watched me play, liked what he saw, and he befriended my dad, which all scouts do when they want to get...
I bet.
When they want to nick the kid. And then all of a sudden we were going round his house for dinner, he was coming round our house for dinner, and this carried on, because in those days we couldn't sign, you couldn't travel outside of an hour to join a club, so he just befriended us. He watched me for 4 years playing. Wow. Every single game I ever played in. And then at 14 he took me down to Spurs for the first time, me and my dad. It was incredible, I have to say. You know, you're sitting as a young kid with this dream, and you're watching football on telly and you're seeing Steve Perryman, Jimmy Greaves.
I mean, big side.
Big players. And then all of a sudden you're on the same football pitch training with them. And because they wanted to impress me, because they wanted me to sign for them, I trained with the first team at the age of 14. I mean, like, it was surreal. Like, you can imagine a 14-year-old training with the big names that all I did was watch. And it just sort of furthered my love for the game. I mean, it's a love that...
But you finish up, Mickey, age 16, coming down to London with your bags, and this isn't like a day trip, this is for keeps, isn't it?
Yeah, sadly.
Tough, though. I mean, London must have seemed like just such a long way away from Sunderland.
Do you know what? It's like in comparison to Sunderland, it's like coming to a wilderness, but a wilderness that you've never known or experienced before. And while I came down with my dad, it was lovely because I had the security of my dad by my side, and he could do all my talking for me, and I didn't have to involve myself. And then all of a sudden at 16, I'm travelling down on the train by myself, which was quite nerve-wracking. I then arrive at King's Cross. I get off trying to find the right tube to get to Seven Sisters. And then from Seven Sisters, the bus down to the stadium. Scary. Yeah, as a 16-year-old schoolboy who was relatively, or not relatively, very, very inexperienced on travel, incredibly naive, and coming to this big wilderness, I had absolutely no idea what to expect. But
it worked. But it worked.
In the end, I got very homesick, ran off form 5 or 6 times. And in the end, Tottenham were brilliant to me. They treated me like I was a king and helped me settle. And here I am.
And then there you are, you're in the first team, you're playing with some of the big names in football, the Ozzy Ardiles, Glenn Hoddle, I mean, really top global footballers. You're in the team, you win the FA Cup, that's got to be pretty cool. But the UEFA Cup was really a big one for you, wasn't it?
I think that, you know, when you're a schoolboy, the FA Cup in my day was as big as the Champions League in reality. So you have this dream about winning the FA Cup, and then all of a sudden you sort of fulfil your dream by playing in your cup final. But the '84 World Cup, it was, the UEFA Cup, I think that doing it in front of your own fans at your own stadium, in the manager's last game ever, the only manager that I'd ever known in professional football, I think it was, and I'd scored the winning goal in the semi-final to to take us to the final, to win it with the very last kick of the game on penalties. I don't think that I'd been picked for England that week as well, so it was like a coming together of every schoolboy dream that I'd ever had. Will never be bettered.
No, fantastic.
Never ever be bettered as long as, and I remember it now. And when I talk about it, I'm getting goosebumps running through my body now. When I talk about it, it's just like it happened yesterday. It really is special.
No, it's a lovely story. And then suddenly money gets in the way. Chelsea come along. And make this club, who you've been basically with since you were 10, effectively, and you're now, you know, FA Cup medal winner, UEFA, you know, you're now a grown man with a successful career, but Chelsea make Spurs an offer that they can't refuse.
Well, yeah, they did. They did. It was, at the time, Chelsea's record offer. And John Hollands, who's former Arsenal player as well. The problem was, you know, my last game at Spurs, for instance, we played Newcastle, we won 5-1, I scored. I'm celebrating in the players' lounge at the end of the game, and the then manager, Peter Shreves, calls me out of the players' lounge and says to me, Mickey, look, we've had an offer that we can't refuse. The chairman's accepted it, and he's told me
that must have felt terrible.
Oh, the worst thing that ever happened. And he relayed this message to me that, look, you know, you can't say no, because if you say no, you won't be picked again. You know,
pretty vicious stuff, then.
Pretty, for a guy who'd known nothing else but Spurs, and who had a love for Spurs that carries through to this very day. It was hard to take, and I swore. You know, you talk about money. I actually swore that day as I drove home, nah, they're not going to dictate to me. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I love this club. I'm not leaving. It's all I've ever known. I joined from school. I'm 10 years of age. And then they'd set up a meeting with John Hollands on the Monday. And I went to John Hollands and I had this meeting, and he was giving me all this spiel about building the team around me and everything. Then he started to talk finances, and I was no interest whatsoever. And then he finished off the conversation. So he was giving me a £400 a week wage rise. And then he finished off the conversation, and I won't tell you the amount, but he said, and if you sign your name, this contract right here and now, before we leave this hotel, we will pay this amount into your bank account tomorrow. I was a little backstreet boy from Sunderland. We never had tuppence to rub together.
Yeah, they got you.
I was like, what, you'll just put it in my bank account
Mickey,
tomorrow?
Mickey, you know, that happened, you came back to Tottenham, you're still, you know, representing Tottenham in many ways. But the story that fascinates me about your life is you go from top-flight footballer, you get injured, you retire, that happens. And you decide to become a London black cab driver. What happens here? Complete accident. I was sitting at home one day, I'd had 2 years of being retired,
Loving playing golf every day. I love golf. I'm a good golfer and played it every day for 2 years, starting to get a bit bored of it and a bit fed up with it. And then one of my mates turns up on my doorstep and I said to him, "Where you going?" He said, I've joined the Knowledge. I'm just off out to do the Knowledge. He was dropping something out. I said, "Oh, do you want me to keep you company?" So he said, "Yeah, come out." So we went out. We had the most amazing day. We stopped for breakfast. We stopped for lunch. And we did it in between. He was learning all these bits. And I actually found out at that moment that, hang on, I had a bit of a photographic memory. I didn't know this before because I'd never noticed a thing. But when we got home, he was doing all this calling over what we'd rehearsed, you know, what we'd done that morning.
Yeah.
And I was just calling it out as if I knew it all my life. And he said, "Wow, how have you learnt that?" I said, "I don't know." And then so I thought, I'll just carry on doing the Knowledge. And then after about 6 weeks, he pulled out and stopped. I just carried on and did it. And it was so easy. In fact, I was ready to pass after 6 months.
Really?
It made me wait 2 years.
Normally it's sort of 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, our cab drivers work blooming hard to get to that level, and they're fabulous. But once you got your ticket, did you find it a disappointment?
Can I tell you something, Nigel? I was a footballer who played in some massive, massive games. I never experienced one single nerve. Never. In the UEFA Cup final, the FA Cup final, I had no nerves whatsoever. The first time I went out in the cab, I was so nervous, I couldn't turn the light on. I drove around for 4 hours with my light off. And I remember I pulled into Holland Park, over off Holland Park Avenue, and I just thought, I can't do it. I've got to go home. And then I said, just turn the light on for 5 minutes. If you get a ride, take them. If you don't, go home. I turned the light on in Holland Park. I pulled out onto Holland Park Avenue, and someone went like that.
Yeah.
So as he was waving me, I thought, pull in, and I thought, oh, please let it be a big place, because I might not remember the little places, because I'm so nervous. And he said, can you take me to Waterloo? Sorry, no, Victoria it was.
That's
and
pretty
then
easy,
the
then.
second one was what?
Yeah.
Biggest,
Yeah,
one of the biggest places you can get.
Yeah.
Could I remember where it was? I was so nervous, I couldn't even remember where it was. I was like, oh. So I was driving along thinking, how do I get to
Well, how long did it last then as a cabbie?
The nerves?
Yeah.
It lasted for about 3-4 months, honestly. And then someone confronted me in the back about the route I took, and I lost confidence. I thought, oh,
good Lord.
Yeah, I
Isn't
lost
it
a bit
funny?
of confidence. But after that, I became, honestly, I'm not boasting, I'm not being conceited. I actually thought I became one of the best cabbies out there. I knew instantly everything.
Why'd you pack it up?
I had a bad back, and I went to see a chiropractor, and he clicked my neck, and then he couldn't untrap my back. And he kept trying and trying and trying.
So it was just time to give it in.
And no, but then I got vertigo. I came out of the surgery and collapsed, and I got really bad vertigo. And then one day, it took me about 8 months to recover.
Moral of the story is stick to football, because that's what you're really good at. But it's a great story. Thank you for joining me.
No, absolutely.
Thoroughly enjoyable.
My pleasure.
Great to see you. Really great to see you.
It's great to see you.
Thank you. Moment. I'm going to be handing over in a second to Jacob Rees-Mogg. We are pretty much done for the day. Virtually no time for Barrage the Farage. I wanted to learn about being a cabbie. One viewer says, why wasn't the DUP included in the negotiations with the EU with Rishi Sunak? Because the DUP would never have agreed. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg, what have you got tonight for us on GB News?
We've got lots of excitements coming up. We're going to talk about this green madness, that you're going to be charged extra for using too much water. Well, look outside, we've got plenty of water. Our petrol cars are going to be stopped 5 years earlier than the famously deregulatory European Union. Why? Why have we got policies that hammer British citizens?
Something to do with your government, I think, of which
It's
was
not my government, it's
not
the
anymore, but it
King's.
was. Before that, let's have a look at the very, very rainy weather.
Good evening, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. After a bit of a gloomy one today, tomorrow for most of us should be a good deal brighter. There'll still be some heavy showers around,
it will be quite mild once more, and it's still going to be pretty blustery. Plenty of isobars on the chart, suggesting gusty winds, particularly this evening close to these weather fronts that are bringing spells of rain across the country. Another pulse of rain heading its way north across England and Wales, spreading into eastern areas through the night. The rain lingering over the Northern Isles, but parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland seeing some decent clear spells. Won't be too chilly, however, enough of a breeze to stop temperatures falling much beyond 6 or 7 Celsius. And for most of England and Wales, many of us will stay in double figures to start Thursday. We do start with a lot of cloud and